Hi there, Dave Levine here. It's great to have you join me on this week's episode of the Sports Stories podcast. Now, before we get started, can I just thank those of you who tuned in last week to the conversation I had with Professor Damien Hughes, co-host of the High Performance podcast and best-selling author. The feedback and comments have been terrific, and I've had a number of listeners share what landed for them and their non-negotiable behaviours. So just as a reminder, if you don't want to miss any of the great conversations, the tips, the guidance, and the never told before stories, then please subscribe and rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts or your preferred platform. Now on to today's episode. This is episode 32 and part of series 4. I'm delighted to have a guest who has played high-level football and cricket as a young person, working his way through to representing a number of counties at cricket as well as representing his country, Scotland. Following a successful cricket playing career, my guest has forged a way as a coach, working in both grassroots and international environments. I'm delighted to welcome John Blain as my special guest today. John has experienced many lows as well as many highs in his career to date, and I know he has reflected deeply on these experiences and is open to sharing them. I'm really excited to speak with John, as I'm confident his insights will be of great interest to many cricket followers, both in England and Scotland, but more importantly, he shares with an intent to help others. There will be something for parents, teachers, coaches and leaders, as well as aspiring cricketers. So let's dive in. I'd like to wish a very warm welcome to Director of Cricket at the Grange Cricket Club in Edinburgh and former Northants, Yorkshire and Scotland cricketer and now coach, John Blain. Well, John, thanks for joining me today on the Sports Stories podcast. It's really appreciated. I was looking back, and our journey goes back over 10 years or so it's been quite some journey. Really appreciate you giving up the time, but you know what, I know you pretty well. Some of the guests listening in might not know you as well, so can you give us a bit of an intro to who you are, but also include, you know, what was your introduction to sport and cricket?
Oh, it's a big question, that who are you? You know, I think I've spent the last what am I now, 41, I've spent the last 41 years trying to find out who I am, and I don't think you ever know who you are, you know, but you're always sort of heading off in a direction you think's right. My introduction to sport, Dave. So where I was born and bred in a small town just outside Edinburgh called Pennycook, and we lived on a semi-detached house which overlooked a cricket pitch, and I mean literally overlooked it. So our back garden, there was a fence, and then through the fence was the cricket pitch. So that's where I had sort of the freedom to move and climb trees and you know, join the cricket club and then, you know, kick a football around. I had a huge circle of friends in the area, and sort of the cricket pitch was the hub of the activity. So I guess that's where sport started for me. Yeah, I guess the 10,000 hours was already in the bank by probably the age of 10, you know. So yeah, it was a real free learning for sport.
Did your dad take you, or was the family involved in it? What was the kind of your family involved?
Yeah, well, mum and dad. I mean, I think it's really important to say at the outset, mum and dad have just been, you know, colossal in their support throughout my career. But you often reflect when you're looking back now, and you know, I'm not a self-indulgent person, but I've sort of taken a bit of time to reflect the last few years as to what it was that sort of you had in place to get you to where you are today. And you know, I sort of look back and look at the role that mum and dad played. You know, mum was sort of, you know, happy if I was fed, watered, and happy. She was a great, I guess, an emotional and holistic support around that. And mum was a grafter as well. You know, she worked for the social work department in Edinburgh, worked with kids with special needs. And dad was a grafter. Dad worked for the police, and especially in specialising in the taxi examination department. So dad was a grafter, but he was around and he was a member at the cricket club, and mum and dad were a member at the cricket club. So he played a bit of sociable cricket. I went across there and sort of got involved when mum and dad were around the club. Dad played football when he was younger, so he always had an interest in football. I knew that. So, but I guess when I was sort of starting to understand my relationship with them, they weren't actively involved in sport. They were just mum and dad, you see. But and I was just with them. But you know, as you get older, you start to understand, especially my dad, his background to sport. But it was a really interesting upbringing, and I think looking back, the right ingredient, you know, the right mix.
When you say right ingredient, right mix, what does that mean for you?
Well, I think the early part, Dave, there is no right and wrong, okay? But for me, it was right, and I think that's the key. You know, I was very lucky to have circumstance. So the circumstance of being on a cricket pitch over the fence, a liberal way to life, a sort of a free approach to go and learn my sport, self-learn. I had the opportunity. I think opportunity is key as well. I've talked about the volume. You know, I had the freedom to go and just do the volume. You know, self-teach myself, self-taught, and then as I sort of came to the cricket club, they started to employ a professional player coach, and there was one gentleman, Phillips and Johnson from Barbados, who he was really my first encounter with a cricket coach. And so I've done all this volume. I've had the opportunity. The circumstance was right for me, and I've now got this add-on of this specialist coaching, the understanding, become a student of the game. That was just a really potent mix. And then, you know, going back to the support, mum and dad, it was just all there, and it wasn't a forceful support. It was a sort of a scaffolding support. You know, I was just there if they were there, if it was needed. And then when my football started later. Actually, it was a friend who, I mean, I went to Boys Brigade and played football there, and I was in goal. So my mum laughs actually. We used to get beat 19-0, Dave. You know, and I'd come home, mum would say, "John, can you not be the goalkeeper this week?" You know. But anyway, I loved it. I didn't see the result. I just loved the opportunity being out there. And then it was a friend of mine who lived down the road. He played for an official team in Edinburgh. And historically, the boys in my town would always go to this other club. And this guy sort of went to a club outside of town and went to the one in Edinburgh. And he said, "Do you want to come along?" So I went along to this club called Edinburgh Hibs. You know, they were based in Edinburgh. And they were from quite a rough part of Edinburgh, you know. And anyway, so I went along and I played a year above myself. So I was a year young, and I took it, you know, like a fish to water, and I enjoyed that. So football took a different path, but I was very self-taught initially, you know. But with cricket, it was, as I say, it was self-taught, but I got coaching earlier at cricket.
What's this thing about self-taught then, John? How did that come about? Or were you self-taught, or would you not receive any help?
I think, Dave, you know, let's fast forward to becoming a high-performance athlete.
Right.
I think I'm very kinesthetic. I'm very visual, you see.
Right.
And I think though that was quite a potent mix for me as a learner. You know, I used to, you know, I was with a football at my feet, or a cricket bat in my hand, or a cricket ball in my hand. Okay, so I was sort of doing the voluming and feeling it, and then I'd sort of sit back and watch, and I can still vividly remember seeing matches at the cricket club. And sort of trying to emulate, you know, what was going on in the field. And then, you know, I'd go inside, and it was a time when Test Match was on the BBC, and I remember watching Curtly Ambrose and Courtney Walsh Bowl, and I just would then come back out after having lunch or dinner and try and recreate that. And the feel was just there for me, you see. So I guess I was learning by teaching myself, but what was relative to my learning style. You know, there's often as a coach, and that's one of my key things now, looking forward as a philosopher, as a coach. There's no point me trying to work with a player, but not understanding how they take on information, you know, and whether that is audio, visual, or kinesthetic, you see. And I think that's key in the whole picture, really.
So your circumstances really sort of fed into your preferred way of learning and working.
Yeah, and you know, was I lucky? Did that happen by chance, or was it created? You know, and again, you know, I'm a parent, and we've made the decision to move back to my hometown. But the reason I made that decision, Dave, is I knew the benefits that was available for my children and where it would fit into the bigger picture. So, you know, mum and dad had my sister. She was born in Edinburgh at the top of a flat, high-rise flat. And then they moved out of Edinburgh, which is, you know, circa 13 or 15 miles out of town, for, I guess, a bit of space, a front and back garden and some more rooms and so on and so forth. But, you know, looking back, that was quite an astute decision for them as parents to create an environment that allowed me and my sister to sort of flourish, you see, and understand as well that, you know, in the city, in the rat race that is Edinburgh, it's often really sort of busy and hectic. Whereas you move out of town, it's a bit more relaxed, and there's a bit more opportunity, and there's a bit more circumstance. And then, you know, as I say, the coaching and the support came along laterally. So I've very much taken that approach with my children and my family now. We've moved to an area back home. We've got that support with my family around, but they've certainly got the circumstances are just right now. The opportunity is there for them, and it's up to myself and my partner to give them that volume, you know. And over time, you just trust the environments they go into to have that coaching.
Wow. Well, John, when did you recognise that environment and that time and that space actually really made a huge impact on you?
Yeah, I don't think you realise at the time. You don't understand at the time. You're just, and I think that's looking back now. You have huge respect for your parents because they were able to sort of not keep you, because children are, you know, children can often have their own mind, but they sort of, you know, supported me in that environment and trusted that where I was being brought up. I didn't see it at the time, you know. I was just in the moment, really. And I think that's where the major part of a coach or a parent is important, where they see the wider picture, they see what that person is involved in a minute, and the importance of keeping them there. Or letting them fly, you know.
And do you think your parents were really conscious about that move, or did they just do it and the circumstances again proved to be lucky or work, or did they actually think, right?
Well, you know, if you have a Sunday afternoon coffee and a cake, or a coffee and a sandwich with mum and dad, and, you know, sitting in the living room, and you talk to them about why they moved away from where they were, some of those messages will come through. You know, they talk about you know, well, first and foremost, again, back then, you know, they didn't have money. They had to work hard for their money. So they moved out of town. They got more for their money out of town. But then they'll talk about the opportunity. You know, we didn't live at the top of a high-rise flat. We had front and back garden. We had space at the back. We had a town to go into. There was schools there for you and your sister. There was clubs around. And so they may not see it at the time. They might have done. I might be doing them with just this justice, but actually, it was a genius move. You know, it was a genius move. And actually, so I've taken that learning into what I've done in the last 5 years.
And I love it how you're sort of connecting all of that big environment and context stuff, and how that's really shaped and influenced you. And I wonder now, though, you know, what would we say, and how would we support individuals that aren't as lucky as that and don't get that, because that must really impact. You know, it's clearly had a huge impact on you.
Yeah, it has. But I think sometimes the struggle is the learning as well. You know, I'm not saying I was privileged, because that's not the way I was. I think sometimes, you know, so let's flip it the other side, and I'm probably fast forwarding here, but I'm involved in football coaching as well as cricket at the minute, and I have been in the last 5 years. Come back to my football, and I understand that there's a lot of children from underprivileged backgrounds. You see. And so that's the role of me as a coach, to identify that first and foremost they're in a difficult situation, but actually you can use that struggle and that challenging period to be their learning, you know. So there's no right and wrong here. It's just, I guess the essence is understanding the person, the circumstance, and that's the skill of the person who is behind them. You know, to facilitate that.
In a nutshell, then, John, in that sort of, you know, in your early teens and moving through the formative part of your career there, where you were saying you were playing a bit of football and cricket, there seemed to be running parallel there. You know, how did you manage that, and which one, you know, took off, or did you play them both for a period of time?
Well, I think the beauty is you never really feel you're good. You know, you just do it. And then my football career took off. There was quite a good coach in Edinburgh who coached at one of the major clubs in Edinburgh, a club called Hutchison Vale, which I'm now back at. Now it's one of the strongest football clubs in the UK for youth development, and has been for, goodness, the last 40 years. And he came and approached my dad, and my dad knew him through work, and he said, "Look, does John want to come and play at Hutchison Vale?" And I went there, and from the age of 13 right through till 15, we won everything. I mean, it's not about winning. We wiped he built a team that was the best in Scotland. We often went to England and dominated as well. a number of players were involved in senior teams and went on to had professional careers at the highest level. So football was very much the sort of thing for me. And I guess the way Scotland set up, football is the thing. You know, rugby's sort of coming on and hockey's improving and cricket is also improving, but in terms of its participation numbers, but football was always the thing. So that was my obvious route. And then cricket was respite, Dave. You know, I mean, so football would sort of finish in whenever it finishes, and you know this. You've got a young son. You know, you sort of, when does it finish? Do you think it sort of continues on into summer? But when it finished, the feeling of actually kicking off my shoes and going out the back to the cricket pitch and going into the nets and having that sun on my face and that freedom again. But yet having that fitness, Dave, and this is an important thing, because I often reflected, why did you turn into a fast bowler? Having that incredible level of fitness that I had as a footballer, it moved into my cricket. And then, you know, with football and the coach I had at football, he was very detailed, he was very organised, and I sort of, I guess, self-taught myself into my cricket. And then the coach came along at Pennycook Cricket Club about, I think it was 12 or 11, 12, and that's where it just sort of, you know, moved on. And then I had a very clear decision to make about, do I choose football, do I choose cricket? Because.
And how old were you then, John, when you were having to make that decision, do you think?
I was about 16, right. 15 and a half, 16, just turning maybe 16. I had been climbing the ranks in the cricket, and Cricket Scotland had a director of cricket called Jim Love, and Yorkshiremen will know Jim Love. Jim came up to Scotland, and I was selected for the South region. Now, Scotland at those times was split up into 4 regions: North, South, East and West. The North were strong at cricket. This is youth level. The West were strong and tenacious. The East were from, should we say, privileged independent school background. The South were farmers. You know, we're from the borders. We're from Melrose, Galashiels, Pennycook. And we were in the South, you see. And we were sort of conjured up and went to this festival at one of the most prestigious independent schools in Edinburgh called Merchiston. And I was 12. And I was 13. And it was under 13 festival, and I terrorized those kids. I was bowling, you know, bouncers and not to sort of be self-indulgent, but I did. And the then coach Jim Love came up to my parents and said, "I'd like John to come forward and trial for Scotland under 13s." Now that was never heard of. You know, someone coming from the borders to play cricket for the national team was unheard of. I was up the inside, Dave. I was, you know, I came up the inside. And then.
Well, John, what was it about you then that really kind of drove you up the inside? You know, because you've taken a different route here. There was something about you that was different, I guess.
Yes, and that you know, historically cricket in Scotland was played in the independent sector, and was sort of had this snootery and clothes shop around about it. And looking back on that, when Jim Love came in, Jim blew that open. You know, Jim blew that open. But I think with me coming from the South, there was always that underpinning of my football background. You know, come on, let's get into this. Okay. And then I had a sheer determination, Dave. I had a sheer determination to make it and cause make a real difference.
And that's the bit I'm really interested in. That sheer determination. Where does that come from? How did you build that, grow that? Did you develop that, or is that an innate thing for you?
I think it's innate. You know, again. I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I did develop that over time through my hundreds and hundreds of sports sessions that I did. But I think, you know, knowing my mum and dad and knowing the characters that they have, you know, both have determination in slightly different ways. You know, and mum's a sort of a quiet, goes about her business, is a woman of steel, is a doer. You know, Dad's got an intellectual determination. He's a really astute guy. He's a grafter at heart. You know, he's worked hard, and I think that comes from, I guess, a genetic side. But then you get that circumstance, you get that opportunity level, and it just comes to the fore. Mm-hmm. And I was hell bent, Dave, on proving people wrong. You know, that the South was, so I came through and I did really well at this festival, and it got to a stage where I think Jim Love said to my folks, "Look, I'd like John to go down to Northamptonshire for a trial." Right. When I was 16 at the time, all involved in the Scotland pathways. I actually made my debut for Scotland at 16 years old, playing Benson Hedges cricket. You know, and then I'll go on to that in time. But I then had a decision to make. I had gone through the football ranks, and I I was involved professionally at Hibernian, and I went to assign sort of basic forms there, and then I moved across to Falkirk and went to Falkirk and played there for a year as a young professional. So I was doing professional football, and then I had this opportunity to go and try out professional cricket. And
John, did you feel that they actually really complemented each other? Because you and I both know that there's big debates, isn't there, in the sport world around actually when do you specialise in different sports and and focus. And it sounds like you've actually taken two sports to quite a high performance level for quite some time, which it sounds brilliant.
Yeah, it sounds brilliant. But the struggle was hard, at times. But they did complement each other and they bounced off each other. The respite of cricket was good for me, and I guess I was probably learning it more of a free way at cricket. But then with football, it was more of a forced way. Going to volume sessions and being coached and so on and so forth. And the cricket was very just a relaxing thing for me. So, you talk about high performance being in the moment and played in the freedom. I think when I played cricket, that's why I really was suited to the higher performance, because that's how I learned. That's how I learned. I played in the moment, and I always say, look, I don't think I was good enough at football. I was a student of football, so I was always captain, and I played defence, and I saw the game strategically, and I was able to help others, and my communication was very good. But I think my general skill was I wasn't as good a passer as others. I could header, I could sort of tackle, but I wasn't as good as the guys around about me. But the coach saw my real value in being this facilitator to organise. Whereas at the cricket side of things, you talk about strategy. When I was younger, what strategy? I just run up and bowling. The ball's there, I'm going to hit it. I didn't. So it's completely different viewpoints.
I guess I'm really drawn though to the fact that the one that you probably ended up excelling in is the one you felt like you were in the moment and played more freely and learnt more self-taught, which is kind of ironic, isn't it? But
it is ironic, Dave, and I this is my conversation I have with a lot of parents. A lot of parents will push is the word, actually, because it is push. A lot of parents will push their children towards an environment they think's right, they think suits them. Okay, kids will migrate towards the right place for them, okay, but have to have that scaffolding around about them. So it's a difficult sort of pushing, but it's an interesting way, sort of how you maneuver them towards the right environment for them. And I always say to people who have the sniff of going into a high performance environment from a youth level, I say just be careful. High performance should come with a toxic sign, and parents don't get that, you see.
When you say come with a toxic sign, and tell me what does that really mean?
It changes the individual quite considerably. Their behaviours change, their expectancies are changed, for the demands are changed, the rhetoric from the coaches change. It just changes it can, Dave, and it's only taken now that looking back, I have a different personality that I had to operate in a high performance world to I have now. I have two sides of the coin, but I needed that. Right. I needed that because if I didn't, you don't survive.
What was that personality then, the high performance personality? And then we'll come to the one you've got now.
Very driven, very selfish, very cutthroat, very straight, very black and white, very disciplined, organized, and someone who I guess I wouldn't settle for either second best or low standards. Just that wasn't in my it wasn't in my mindset. And I think where I got it wrong as a player, I often got it right. Don't get me wrong, I must have got it right to get to play at a reasonable level. But where I got it wrong was not quite understanding that people don't have those levels of expectancies on themselves or just standards of quality of work.
So say that again, John, in terms of actually what did you learn from being in that environment about yourself and others?
It's not till I came out of the environment, Dave, that I reflected on that. I didn't learn a huge amount. I was just in the moment. And my understanding wasn't really, I wasn't looking sideways. I was looking inwards and looking forward.
Okay.
And I think that it was only until I came out of high performance environments, I looked back and I thought, that's why that happened. And that's why you behave like that. And you shouldn't have done this or you should have done that. Does that make sense? You know, so I think that's where, and it's ironic, you know, I talk so candidly about having good coaches and good role models in my early part of my year. As soon as I went professional, I didn't have good coaches. And I mean that. I didn't have good support network. You know, mum and dad who were there for you are all of a sudden, you know, 400 miles away. You know, you don't want to lean upon them because you're now in this professional environment. With all due respect, they don't quite understand things. So you then do things how you see it. You play the game how you see it. And you get things wrong and you learn, you know. But you know, as a coach now, I'll often pull up people for one, their behaviour, and two, things that I see, because and I highlight them. You know, I say, look, guys, you have to understand the ramifications for what you do here, not only performance, but also in you as a brand and you as a, you know, I'm talking from a high performance point of view here.
Yeah. So John, when you were in that environment and you said, look, I didn't have really great coaches and my support network sort of started to disappear a bit or became more distant. How did you manage yourself? How did you get yourself through that time? Because that doesn't sound like it's such an easy place to be.
No, it's not an easy place to be. But again, it goes back to how I learned myself, you know, especially in a cricket environment. You know, I problem solved as a cricketer back in Penicuik when I was, you know, I guess between the ages of 8 and 13 and 14, you know, that sort of age. I just problem solved, you know, and, you know, I learned off people who were next to me. And I think one of the good things was, you know, my parents installed me about, you know, aligning myself with good people. I did actually tend to sort of migrate towards people who were, again, like me, organized, disciplined, just all around general family man. Family people. So I had that resource as well. But that was a choice that I made. You know, you'd often, and especially in a professional sport, you'd often get people out drinking and doing all the, you know, the sort of the sins. But I just wasn't really interested. You know, I wasn't really interested in that.
Yeah. But you obviously found some resource in there to help manage yourself. And it sounds like that kind of that independence that you created as a young person in terms of self-learning and being able to look after yourself really was valued and needed when you were, it sounded quite a lonely place in a way being.
Oh, incredibly lonely. You know, let's be honest, you know, out there as a sportsman, incredibly lonely. But looking back, you know, the pillars that were in place then stood me instead. Yeah. Dave, I left home at, cool, let me think. So I had just turned 17. It was the April. Wow. So I was 17 in the January, and then I started my first contract in Northampton on the April. No, I tell a lie. It was in March. So I was just turned 17, and I drove from Penicuik to Northampton, which, you know, is 60 miles north of London. Dad gave me a car. God bless him. Went down there and started a professional cricket career. You know. Stayed in a place called the Coach House Hotel, which was synonymous with Northamptonshire. But Anne Long, who ran the place, gave me a room at the top of and I rented that out for 50 quid a week, 200 quid a month. And my first night there, my car got broken into. They stole all my radio and my cassettes. You know, that remember cassettes those time. First night I was there. The first week I was there, David, there was I'm going to sound like Taggart here. There was a murder. There was a murder in the park across the road, and I actually heard her screaming, so I ended up involved. I woke up one morning and my car, the road was cordoned off, and, you know, so that was my first sort of, and then I was welcome. And I was, you know, having to deal with the entry into professional cricket and the expectancy on me, and just, so it was a real rude awakening, you know.
And John, if you were to summarise then in terms of, you know, with that introduction to sort of leaving home and having your first professional contract, you know, and you're pretty much out on your own, to be confronted with all of that, you know, what one or two resources do you think really got you through that stage? Because you could have very easily jumped back in the car and gone back home, couldn't you? But you
discipline. Discipline. I think discipline. And I think that's where my upbringing really came to the fore. Discipline and, you know, my support from my folks. You know, there's dark times. And actually, you know, in fairness to Northampton, it is a family club. You know, I spent a lot of time there. However, looking back, it was pretty unhealthy. You know, there was quite a sort of family atmosphere there. Whereas if I'd gone to a major county, a test match playing county straight away, I don't think there would have been that sort of ability to hang around the club after training and just be with the family. It would have been straight back to wherever you were based and being quite lonely. So, but I think the discipline and the maturity I'd had from being involved in sport and organising my life to that stage got me through. I was quite worldly wise, you know, at sort of even at 17, I'd been through, you know, the whole football scene in Edinburgh. You know, I was fairly sufficient in terms of how I could handle myself. I was just I guess I was ahead of my years, and I look at it now, and coaching kids at 16, 17, I thought, you know, I was playing at Trent Bridge in front of 8,000-9,000 for Scotland at your age. You know, I was playing reserve team football for Hibernian and Falkirk against, you know, some names that you and I all know on this call, you know, at some of the football stadiums in Scotland, you know, with full-time football managers judging my performance. You know, I was pretty pretty strong for my age, really. I think, looking back now, you know.
So fast forward then, John. So, you know, you in your playing career here, you know, how was your playing career, and what did you learn from it that's now taken you through into the coaching world that you're now in?
Well, I guess my playing career took twofolds. And Dave, I've got the opportunity. I want to thank you for this, because this is quite not cathartic for me. I'm not a self-indulgent guy. I've never talked about my career, so if I stutter, then you understand why. But no. I guess on reflection, my career took two. It was sort of game of two halves, really. I spent 97 to 2002. 2003 at Northampton, and then I got released. You know, I had a major. Well, I played in the World Cup for Scotland in 1999, and all throughout the tournament I had a sore back, and I was getting injections to sort of ease the pain. And it turned out I had sort of 3 stress fractures in my back, so they had to operate in the September of '99. So I had a major back operation, L5-S1 fusion. So I had a career-ending injury, but yet, you know, I had this huge operation in a cast for, you know, from sort of my right down in a cast for the best part of it, you know, 8 months, and then, you know, walking after a year. And then, so I had that. And then, so I had a real struggle to get myself back to fitness again. And then I got myself back to fitness, got to where I was. And that was all, I had one physio who helped me, but that was all self-led. Took myself off to New Zealand to do my rehab. And then eventually, I think I just never really recovered the freedom that I was as a bowler. And I went, I left Northants. They released me at 2003, and I sort of went back to the drawing board, went back to Edinburgh, right. You know, and then I got a call one day from, I trialled at a few counties, got a call one day from David Bias at Yorkshire, and he said, I want to speak to you, John. So I went down to Yorkshire, and Dave said to me, John, he says, you played against us in 2002, he says, and I was blown away by your sheer pace, he said, and I nearly bowled out Yorkshire in the second innings of a match at Headingley once, in a championship match, and it was the quickest I've ever bowled. And David Ripley, to this day, who was the keeper at Northants, has kept to, you know, some of the world's greats. He said to me, it's one of the quickest spells he's ever kept to. Anyway, Dave said, I'd like to sign you. And at the time, I needed an opportunity, so I took it. And it was a really pivotal moment for me. So I went to Yorkshire in 2003, and then went through to sort of 2008 as a player. So I had a really strong 5 years there. The first year at Yorkshire, it was incredible. And I was seeing a huge county club based to what and different to what I'd been at Northants. You know, I'd walk into a newspaper shop, and the guy behind the counter would know you, and he'd know your stats. And whereas, you know, in Northampton, it wasn't really a thing, you know. So this huge, I mean, the biggest cricket club in the world, the supporters and all the rest of it. So a real eye-opening experience for me. And then after I finished at Yorkshire, I guess I just had 5 years there. I was getting a bit older, and I went back to Scotland and started to play again. I was playing back for the Scotland team, and I got a call from Stuart Regan, who was the chief executive at Yorkshire at the time, and said, John, have you got a minute? He said, would like to speak to you. And I said, Stuart, I left sort of a year and a half ago, you know, my as a player. No, as a coach. He said, would like to come down and talk about a coach. Would you come to Scarborough? So I went down to Scarborough, drove down overnight, and then had a meeting with himself, Martin Mox, and Steve Oldham at Scarborough. And we talked about the coaching role, and the coaching role was to sort of run the academy with Steve Oldham and be Steve Oldham's assistant bowling coach, club bowling coach, with a view to Steve retiring in 2 or 3 years' time.
And that was your first introduction into coaching?
And that was my first introduction to coaching, Dave. I didn't have, I'd done my badges. I'd done my level 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
But, I hadn't done a huge amount of coaching. It was interesting, Dave. I said to them, I said, what is it that's attracted you to me, And there was an instance in the indoor school at Yorkshire one day where one of the senior pros took some throws off a junior pro, and he was a test player. And I was a player at the time, and he took the throws, he hit the balls, and turned around and walked out the net. And I turned around and said to him, "Oi," and he was a test player, famous cricketer. And I said, "Oi, wait." He says, "Oh," I said, "Well, hold on." I says, "That kid's not your slave." I says, "Pick the balls up." I says, "And more importantly," I says, I've noticed this about your batting." And he listened to me. But Steve said, and Ian Hughes at the time had said they'd seen that, they'd sort of remembered that. Anyway, and then so I guess that was a real moment in time. But I hadn't been actively coaching. I had been doing a little bit, but nothing. I'd been working with the academy kids when I was a pro, but that was it really. So I guess they were choosing on personality.
Did you think there was a coach in you though? Did you know that coaching was where you were going to go? And probably when in your playing career did you start believing that coaching might come next?
Well, I didn't think about coaching, but I knew there was a gene in there that wanted to help people. Going back to mum's upbringing, mum looked after kids with special needs. I used to give up we used to choose a thing called respite, where we'd have kids with cerebral palsy coming to the house over the weekend, and I'd give up my bed for the children to stay, and I'd sleep with my sister or I'd sleep on the floor, and there was that sort of helping thing in our family. Yeah. So I knew that was in me, and then strategically going back to my football, I could see it. I remember I was centre half and I'd be saying, you go there, you do that, no, don't do that. I'd be sort of doing that, you see. So I guess I had that in me. And then I had this huge opportunity, you see. And that's how it came about. But I knew I had that desire to help people.
And what did you learn then, John? You said you mentioned that whole going back to Yorkshire being quite pivotal in terms of both your playing, but also more so your coaching now. Because at the start of your coaching journey, how did you become a coach? What sort of coach did it start making you?
How do you become a coach? That's a good question, isn't it, Dave? It's how do you become the coach? And
what sort of coach did you become? Have you become?
Well, I think you get given the position. People inherit positions, or get given positions, people get given positions, but there's also you can earn a position. So I could have been given I was given the role of academy lead and assistant club bowling coach, but in essence, I didn't have the credentials to fit that. You see. In time, what I learned was that you have to earn the credentials to get the position, you see. And I think my struggle to earn the credentials was my greatest learning. What happened throughout that period at Yorkshire was one of my biggest learnings. So, now I fast forward to where I am now, I've got various positions and roles, but I think I've earned the right to have those positions, you see. And all that's between the bookends is incredibly compelling and really self reflecting for me. It's been a brilliant, a difficult time from when I took the job at Yorkshire to now, but it's been a really good learning for me.
And John, and the coach that you are now, then, if you were to reflect back as to your playing days and the various coaches that you mentioned, both good and bad, throughout your whole career, because you've said there's periods of both. What have you learned, or what have you picked up? Do you think that's really making you the coach you are?
I'd like to think that I'm a holistic based coach, Dave, in the regard that I understand the individual I'm working with better, and understanding their experiences, their learning types, their background, and just all of the above. I feel I'm equipped with the toolbox, and it's the sort of coaching toolbox cheesy line, but I do feel I've got the toolbox that I can use to work with that individual. So going back to when I first started off my coaching career, I probably didn't understand the individual but enough, and then probably didn't have a toolbox to sort of support the person. But now I feel I've got both through just circumstances that have happened to me. And then looking at the coaches that I guess didn't think were great, you know, I almost pity some of them now, because I know they, one, didn't understand the person, and two, they didn't have the toolbox. You know, they were sort of just bumbling along, and then we're just in the situation because they found themselves there, and weren't ready for it. You know. Yeah. So I go into a situation now, and I know that I have to be ready for that situation. I won't take it on unless I'm 100% ready for it. Two, I know how I'm going to do it, and three, I mean, I know I have the confidence and know that I've got enough behind me to sort of to do the job. It's been a real interesting journey, and hopefully throughout this conversation, Dave, that you'll understand that things that have happened to me in my career and in my life have affected to where, I guess, like we all have, it makes me what I am today, you know. And I haven't even touched on, you know, my challenges with Scotland in the World Cup and why I left the camp the day before a World Cup. I haven't talked about the reason for leaving Yorkshire and what happened there. And those two pivotal times in my career, both as a player and as a coach, were just huge. You know, I've only talked about the sort of periphery stuff. So I think ultimately I'm in a really quite strong position for what's happened to me.
So out of all of that then, John, what plenty of turning points and pivots, and you know, I think you really epitomise what the sort of Sports Stories podcast is about, because I think clearly from hearing your story, life's not linear. You know, it's gone all over the place, and you've picked up so many different experiences. And I'm hearing some of the harder experiences also might have been some of the best experiences in terms of learning and opportunity. What would you say is one of your biggest experiences today that you call back and go, wow, that taught me loads?
Well, I've just mentioned that two instances was World Cup 2009.
What did you learn from that then?
To understand the dynamic, and that people weren't always on my coming from my frame of reference. Okay. You know, brief context to that was that I was a senior player for the Scotland team. We'd gone to a World Cup, T20 World Cup in England, but previous to that in 2008, we'd been to a World Cup 50 over World Cup qualifier in South Africa. We hadn't performed. There was sort of a new coach had come in. The group were self-policing, and we were at the top of the associate world. The group was self-sufficient. The coach tried to come in and change it, and you know, being a coach now, I think he probably tried to do it his way, which is categorically the wrong thing when you have a group that are so experienced. We didn't qualify for the World Cup, 50 over World Cup. So we went back to the UK. I went home after the World, and I said to my folks, look, I really don't know if I can continue playing for Scotland under this backroom staff and this leadership. I said, my folks said, look, you've got a World Cup in London in May. Just go to that and enjoy it, you know. So they changed captain. Gavin Hamilton phoned me and said, look, Blain, I'd like you to be my vice captain. Would you do that? I said, look, Gav, absolutely fantastic. I said, but let's get back to old ways, you know, shirt and tie or chinos and polo shirt, you know, no flip-flops, buses leaving on time, a little bit of discipline. Back to the cricket that we used to play when we were self-policing, sort of when we're leading the associate nation. And I didn't join up with the squad in London until sort of a couple of days before the tournament started, because I've been at Yorkshire doing my stuff there. And we played, I remember, we played a bounce match against Bangladesh at John Paul Getty's ground in London. And we were on in the afternoon. I think the first game on was New Zealand against Australia, and we were on against Bangladesh in the afternoon. So there was like a Verve Clico tent. But we were training outside the ground. And I remember going to the nets and running up and bowling, and batsmen were running around sort of doing all the T20 stuff, and bowlers were doing all this stuff. And it was just an absolute mess, you know. And I said to Gav, what's going on here? I said, well, why don't we just go back to what we talked about? You know, the basis of a team, the traditional values, it still is in good stead. He said to me, I'll just run with it. It's what the coach wants to do. So anyway, we went to the match, and we batted first against Bangladesh, and we were, I think we batted first, and we were something like 25 for 5 or something, you know. And I just looked at Gav, and anyway, there's a gentleman came in our team back in middle order and got us up to a total 140. Anyway, I sort of took the new ball for the second innings and bowled this sort of wide first ball of the game, wide off stump, and it got hit over third man for 6, and then I bowled this slightly foolish ball next, and it got driven for 4. So first 2 balls are gone for 10, and my third ball I bowled a bit straighter, and the batsman just knocked it back, knocked it straight. Tamim Iqbal just knocked it straight back to me. The next sort of 4 balls just knocked straight back. And I thought to myself, if I bowl it straight, he will just try and play me properly. Okay, so I thought to myself, it's quite clear cut this, and that's my takeaway from high performance sport. That actually it is quite clear cut. It's almost like you can read the story. Mm-hmm. So anyway, they won the game in the last over, and I don't know if you remember the coach at Hull City, the football coach, who sat the players round in the circle and pointed. Remember, he sat them down and did that. So we got called across to sort of the Verve, in front of the Verve Clico tent, which was really quite busy. And I'm thinking, we're not going to do our team debrief here. So we did. We sort of sat down, and the coach stood over us and started to give it. And he was sort of addressing the problems, and I was like thinking, this is ridiculous. This is like schoolboy stuff. So I looked at Gav, and Gav looked at me, and I said, Gav, I thought we were just going to police this ourselves and go back to. He just went nothing. So anyway, the coach said, does anyone want to say anything? And I put my hand up, and he went, I don't want you to say a thing. And I was like, okay. So I looked at Gav. Anyway, I said to Gav, when we get back to the hotel, I want to speak to you. So we went back to the hotel. And I remember we got back to the hotel and there was a wedding on. There was nowhere to go to have a chat. So we got in the foyer, ended up in the kitchen. And I remember the sort of chef was there sharpening his knives, as we were having this heated conversation. I was like, Gav, look, I thought we were going to get back to basics here. We're going to get back to policing it ourselves. We're losing the identity that was, Anyway, he said, well, do you know what, Lenny? If you don't like it, he said, you know what to do. I says, well, do you know what to do, Gav? I says, I really can't operate. And I went to my room and I took my gear off and I jumped in a taxi and I got the last train back to Leeds. And in essence, I walked out. And to this day, Dave, I still remain, because I sent an email to the board when I was driving back on the train back to Leeds, stating the reasons why I did it. And that email was pulled out subsequently. And the points 10 years later have come to, I said, you won't understand on the email I said, you won't understand the ramifications for what's happening now till 10 years down the line. Anyway, so, but the point was, that moment in time said a lot about me as a character to a lot of other people outside. And it's taken me a long, long, long time to recover, to sort of grow again after that. However, I stood up for what I believed in, you see. Yeah. So I missed the World Cup. And then, fast forward to 2011, Yorkshire first team are relegated from the first division, and there's a sort of I didn't know the sort of a political landscape at the club between certain coaches that's gone back for an umpteen years at play, and a restructure needs to happen. I'm sort of collateral damage to that, and as you know, sometimes in industries, one just can't go, everyone has to go. So there was a restructure. At the time, I was second team coach, academy coach, bowling coach, and everybody went. 5 coaches all went at once. And it was hard for me at the time. And I had a follow-up conversation with Martin Moxon about the whole thing. And he just said, look, John, I'm so sorry, but it just had to happen that way. But the learnings from that, Dave, have just been so compelling and so developmental for me, from both circumstances. And I'm sorry to labour the point, but it's part of.
And I think you really highlight for me, that sometimes these really difficult situations, when we can grow through them and look back on them, inform who we are, and I just hear some of the words that I pulled out there are the importance of standards for you. And, that's something that's driven right through your philosophy and your style, and as a player and as a coach, values are also coming through really strongly here in terms of who I am as a coach. And, I'm really curious now as to how those experiences really help you formulate the teams that you have and how you develop players, because values and standards are really, really key. And the last one, and I like working in threes, as you know, is also really fundamentally what's sport and cricket all about. And actually, you talk there at the top level is about sometimes just going back to the basics. And actually, if we do the basics well, connected to good standards, we perform at the highest level, and enjoy what we do.
And there has to be something that underpins everything within the individual, but also collective as well. So you sit in these team meetings and they come up with these sort of things that they put up on the board. Yeah, I get that. I understand that. But what the facilitator doesn't understand, that each person in that room has their own set of standards, has their own set of criteria, has their own sort of framework, and that's where the fatigue comes in a coach, is that, often coaches will try and draw a blanket over a group and facilitate it like that. That the fatigue from a coaching point of view is not only the volume you do in terms of throwing or setting up or volume sessions, it's getting around everybody to understand their framework and understand their point of reference, within what you're trying to create, you see. And look, nobody, I mean, I said I didn't have good coaches. Good's not the word, but you don't often see eye to eye with a player, because you have to hold those non-negotiables, because you ultimately know what the end goal looks like. You have to say, look, I'm sorry, but that doesn't quite fit into what we're doing and saying and trying to be and all the rest of it. And I tell you what, this, Dave, the higher up the ladder you go, the more self-indulgent that international athletes can be. Very rarely do you get, or high performance athletes can be, very rarely do you get someone who has a real broader thinking, because the pressures are so high. If they don't do it, then no one else is going to do it, and it's a dog eat dog world. So yeah, I just love it. I've always had a good conversation with you, because we talk along these lines. There's not everybody understands it, because it's a deeper conversation to have.
John, in hindsight, looking back, and I know that's a wonderful thing, and I know you've shared some stories there which I know are really difficult for you, and you've worked really hard over the last 10-15 years in exploring them. Is there anything that you wish you'd have done differently in hindsight, or are you kind of happy that you've done what you've done and learned from it, both the good and the bad?
Look, Dave, I think if I hadn't have had those two pivotal moments in my career, then I wouldn't be where I am today, and I wouldn't have the reflections and the learning. So yes, I regret what I did, and my folks told me at the time, walking out in the World Cup and the sort of message it sends out, they told me at the time, but I was stubborn. But what they fail to understand is that stubbornness is what's got me through umpteen challenges previously, So but do you know what, Dave? It is a story to tell, and this is the first time I've had a chance to talk about it. I haven't spoken about it. I've kept my counsel. I've gone through the right avenues, spoke to the people that would understand. And the learnings, as a 41-year-old man now with some incredible experiences, and I know I sent my CV sadly to you to say, Dave, if you want some background on what I've done in my life, here it is. I sort of looked through my CV the other day and I thought, oh my goodness, you've actually, for a 41-year-old man, done quite a lot of stuff.
You've done a huge amount.
And it's quite a compelling story, but the learnings within that is what's made me today. So in answer to your question, I wouldn't change it.
Well, John, and I'm blown away by it, because the experiences and the exposures you've had to so many different places is phenomenal. And the thing that really warms me, if we go right back to the beginning, actually, is that philosophy that you talked about quite a lot early on in the conversation around actually really trying to understand the people that you work with. Because I have a sense of actually throughout your career, different people, some really tried to understand you and some people didn't understand you, and actually the takeaway.
The Christian in me wants to think that, and again, I was brought up in a Christian background, but the Christian in me wants to think that they didn't want to understand. They didn't have the ability to understand me, and I think that's the great skill of a coach, that, you can often come from your point, you have to go and try and understand the individual, and that's what I do now. Dave, I work at grassroots football, cricket, right through to international high performance, and I had contact with both sports at that level, and I enjoy it. I feel comfortable in operating in all environments, and pros and cons for working in different areas, but I feel able to cope with it now. So it's been a real learning experience for me. But sometimes I find it hard to sort of encapsulate it into into an hour podcast, or even in a few lines on a piece of paper, or even a CV, because that doesn't tell the full story.
Well, and I think, again, John, that's probably the beauty of why we're talking about sport and people development, because you can't encapsulate it in a short 1 hour, can you? Because there's a lot of ins and outs and complexities to the world we are. And I think, and actually, is that not why we do the job we do in terms of people development and coaching? Because it is complex, but the rewards are phenomenal, aren't they?
The rewards are phenomenal, but you come home, Dave, and you sort of take the jacket off and you take your whatever it was, and you throw it down, and you think, I've really had a day there, I've really had a bad day, but actually it is what makes you, it's the struggle that gives you that chapter in the book and allows you to sort of have the nice chapters, and I mean, I know we're sort of bringing it to a close here, but my kids come home and we're sitting having dinner, and around the dinner table, your kids will ask you 25, 30 questions in a circle in sort of a 30-minute, 25-minute window, and you're constantly giving the answers and putting things in boxes for them, and that's what you do as a parent to make them understand what's happened in that day relative to why it's happened and so on and so forth. As a coach, and as often as a coach on your own, you have to find the answers for yourself. You're asking yourselves the question, you're going, I've got no one really to ask the answer to this. I've got you as a real mentor and a real shining light, and I've got my folks. But in fairness to my folks, sometimes they don't understand what I do because it's sort of moved on to a different level. I've got a coach mentor in football, and I guess I've got various colleagues in the cricket world. But often you find yourself on your own trying to find the answers, Dave. What does that mean? Where does that fit into that? Why has that happened?
I'm going to draw a bit of a parallel here, though, John, because I understand what you're saying, but actually, for me, that's been a real thread through all of your career. You've gone out there and tried to find your own answers. You've been, one of the threads that you talked about a lot for me was I'm self-taught. And I'm paralleling a bit here because I am a little as well in terms of I'll go and find a way without calling in. But what I have loved about what you've just shared there is actually your willingness to actually start engaging with others and recognizing that others can support you and actually help you find a way. You don't have to do it all on your own. And I think performance sports people, and business people, a lot of the leaders often feel like they have to do it on their own, and they don't, do they?
No, they don't have to at the moment. And I think with immaturity, Dave, comes an outburst, and with the immaturity that I had, it manifests itself in a frustration and an anger in actions, in physical actions, but with maturity and time, you might, kick the desk or whatever, but actually in time, you learn to deal with those actions and behave in a more suitable manner, which doesn't affect what you have, and I love my work because it can be me working with the international team as I am at the minute with Scotland, and you're dealing with high performance World Cup cricketers, or I can be in the hall working with, under 10 softball. There's always a situation that comes up on the radar and you go, what's the learning in that? And why does that happen? And where does that fit into the picture? And then you drive home. You drive home sometimes, whether I've not got Radio 2. I'm at the Radio 2 stage now, Dave.
Oh, no.
If I've not got Radio 2 on, I'm in silence. I'm thinking, what's the learning on that? And if I don't get to the bottom of it, I'll often phone someone and say, what do you think to this?
Yeah.
And it's just, that's where I get it from. And it doesn't, it doesn't get rewarded in a monetary thing. It's not about the intrinsic thing. It's the extrinsic. It's not that it get rewarded in an extrinsic thing. It's the intrinsic thing that really, really stimulates me now,
Well, and I love that question, though, because I think that's a real gift for those that are listening in terms of asking that question. It's as simple as what was the learning in that, and taking that time just to reflect. Because for me, that's probably something that I've seen throughout all of your career here. You often were asking yourself the question whether I performed well or not so well, but what was the learning in it? What was the learning? What can I take forward from this experience?
I have, so at the club I work at, the Grange Cricket Club, director cricket there, and I've set up a Grange Academy, and that's sort of based on my template of my time at Yorkshire. And it's been in the situation 5 years, and I'm in it with a good friend of mine, Dr. Raj Routtree McCrea. Raj is a doctor. His wife is a doctor as well, and they're involved in high performance across Scotland from a medical background. They're two incredible people, and I mean that. Their practitioners are brilliant, but they're incredible people. And him and I, and often his wife will have a discussion around just that, and it's a really stimulating place to be and work out what it's all about. And it's real growth for me, you know, and I think it's important. And that's one of the advice I'd give to any coach, you know, try and work it out yourself, but actually have a real trusted support network whose opinion you value round about you to go and bounce it off. Because that's important. You know, you might not see it as clearly as, because you're involved, as you should do. So someone outside might see it quite clearly. But it's also important. It's one of the biggest things that you said to me. If you were to say to me now, your next, John, what must you do now as a coach? I've got to do more CPD, you know, more continual professional development. I've got to do more learning, because I'm always on task, Dave. I'm always doing volume. I'm always doing sessions. I'm always in the moment. I don't take enough time to step back and go and do some learning, you know. So I'm actively seeking opportunities to go and learn now, whether it be in other sports, whether it be phoning people. And that was the reason I got back into football coaching initially, because I'd been sort of getting to a stage with cricket that I thought I need to go and challenge myself back in football. Football's fundamentally where you came from. You understand it. There'll be synergies. So go and do it. And actually it'll be good for my learning. So I work in a completely different social structure out of football to I do at cricket. And it's absolutely gold for my learning. And both complement each other.
Well, and on that note, John, you know, which I think is just amazing, you know, right back at the beginning of our conversation, we talked about you playing football and cricket in parallel, and they're actually on a similar journey and actually being complementary to one another. And look, you know, 30, 40 years down the line, where are you now? You're actually back coaching both football and cricket, whereby probably they're complementary to each other in terms of they're actually supporting and helping and driving you on, which I think is just an amazing story and a great sort of positioning of how different environments can really enable and support and push you on in terms of your development.
Well,
which is just
Dave, we haven't talked. We've talked previously about environments and sort of engendering that culture within environments. And I did my level 4 piece on changing cultures, and that was a real, you know, authentic leadership as well. I did an element on that as well, but that was a real sort of eye opener for me. How do you change a culture? What do you do? What does an environment look like? What does an authentic leader look like? I did all that as well. And environments for me are key, and what you encouraged within that, and the growth. And I mean, we've looked at individuals there and talked about individuals, but we haven't even talked about the environment and the culture you create. And that, you know, going back to my home life as a young kid, you know, that campfire was always on at home. That sandwich was always on the table. That sausage roll and beans was always in the kitchen, and there was always that campfire at home to go home to. You know, my philosophy now as a coach, that any environment you have, that campfire has to be on for the athlete to come back and touch base with you. You know, and I have to have that ability to get around that campfire and just so yeah. I mean, there's so many elements to Dave. We could talk all day. We have talked all day before. I mean, some of our meetings were 4 and 5 hours. I know that. But you know, on record, through those difficult times, especially at Yorkshire, you were colossal, and your work, Dave, supporting a coach is immense. You know, so thank you for that. Just on record.
Well, I appreciate that, John, and thanks for being so open and honest. And as I say, I know you have worked with some of those issues throughout your life and continue to do so, and I think that's what we all are doing. But just thank you for being so open and honest. What I'd like to do, just to draw us to a close, though, is just to ask 1 or 2 quick fire questions, you know, some snappy answers here, which I know sometimes it's hard when me and you get together because we go off. Yeah. But, you know, in terms of your brilliant journey, you know, you've talked about the real practical experiences you've had, but you've also, you know, picked up a lot of learning through reading books and done a lot of studies from looking at, you know, what you've done. Are there any key books or references which you would say have really been pivotal to your journey that you would recommend to some of the listeners?
Oh, books, Dave. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a book person.
No, okay.
I find it difficult. I'm more audio. So references.
And what about audios? What sort of audios do you go to?
Yeah, I go to podcasts. I go to people who have had varied journeys. You know, I don't particularly go to mainstream stuff in terms of leaders. I go to people who have got quite a wide and varied. But again, it's something I need to improve on, Dave, because it really does stimulate me. You know, I've listened to a few of your podcasts and came off them going, they've been great. I need to do more of that. But then because I'm so busy in the moment, you don't get the time to do it, you know? So, and it's a bit of non-answer, but
okay.
Hopefully I've given you an answer, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, okay. I always ask this question because I think, we're in the working world here. You're in performance sport, but I also see what you're doing is running a business, in terms of actually running the Grange Club and, the development around that. Crucially, John, how do you prepare yourself physically and mentally to be the best you can be on a day-to-day basis right here now?
I think it comes from a level of discipline and organization, Dave. I think as a coach, the volume has to be up there. I'm not criticizing anyone else, but if you're a coach, which you're a facilitator of others, you cannot get away from the volume. So you have to have the discipline to go again and go again and go again and go again. So I guess it's a discipline that I really underpin myself, and the organization. I was always one, and I still am one, for having things in line. I have a really supportive family at home and partner who is organized here. And from my state of mind, that's really quite crucial. I couldn't go out to work if I knew things weren't in place back at home. So I guess the organization, the discipline is key for me, Dave.
Yeah.
And it allows me to then go and be the best product, the best model of me that I can be. Yeah. And if things are, if things are a little bit muddled and a little bit not organized, I don't feel I'm at my best. I've got to spend a bit of time getting organized to then go again.
So there's a real planning thing then, isn't there? If I plan to prepare, then I'm good to go, aren't I?
And I think it allows me a freedom of thought process as well. To sort of to think clearly.
Brilliant. Okay, just a couple more then. You've also mentioned along the way, key pivotal points. Are there 2 or 3 people that you would refer back to and say, wow, those people stick with me as being crucial and pivotal in my journey in terms of influencing you?
Yeah, Dave, I think it's important that at the outset, I mentioned my family, mum and dad, and my sister. She brought a humour to. She called me golden balls, and she used to. Well, she did. She grounded you, and my sister's a real salt of the earth. She would give you a last penny girl, and she used to say, when Dad was running me around all the country and Mum and Dad to football and cricket, she used to say, just remember, I've got a netball match this weekend, and she was never sport minded, but she'd say, so I'd come out from football and we'd be having Sunday lunch, and we'd be sitting there and we were talking about the football, and Angela would just sort of pipe up. She'd say, I won my netball this morning, so we just laugh, but she didn't have a game of netball, but anyway. But my family are important at the outset. Sister played a really good role in that. I think from a coaching point of view, there was the West Indian guy, Phillips and Johnson at Pennycook, the cricket coach, Jim Love, who gave me an opportunity. And I think that's key as a coach. You have to have someone who, 1, believes in you, and 2, give you that opportunity. And then, there was a football coach at my football club called Ricky Graham. Was brilliant. Again, the completely opposite end of this coaching spectrum, but brilliant, dedicated, loyal, hard, knowledgeable. And then you sort of go through your life as a professional player. I didn't have a huge amount of support in terms of as a player coach, as a player. I didn't really align myself. And then I got to Yorkshire, and I started to pick up a higher level of coaching there. Steve Oldham, who was at Yorkshire at the Blain time, he was an incredible coach. In fact, one of the best cricket coaches I've ever seen. He was brilliant for me as a player. And he gave, I got an opportunity to sort of come to Yorkshire as a coaching staff. So he was pivotal. But the opportunities I had to mix with people in the cricket club that I was brought up in, and subsequently in life have been pivotal. Have been important.
Great stuff, John. And I know it's a tricky question, because I know, especially for someone like yourself who really does reflect back on and sees the roles that different people have played in your life, it's a big question. But I can really see that some of those people have opened doors at the right sort of time, and made a difference to you. So thanks for sharing that. My last question then is, you've shared your story here. You've been really open and honest, shared some stuff which I know has been a little bit tricky at times for you to get your head around, but I really appreciate that, because I think that's what this is all about. It's sometimes cathartic sharing our stories, but I think many people can really resonate with the ups and downs and the highs and lows, and people will aspire to have journeys through sport, whether it be as a player or a coach or an administrator, or learn from your environments. So John, you've talked about your CPD and your development. Whose sports story might you like to hear that you haven't, or like to delve a little bit more deeper that might really help you or be of some interest to you?
I guess someone who's got quite a diverse background, someone who is who has, on the face of it, been successful, you know, to the uneducated eye, being really successful or being successful, but someone who has quite a compelling story behind it, and to understand the reasoning for it. You know, I did listen to, and sorry to say this, but I listened to your podcast, but I did listen to the Ole Gunnar Solskjaer podcast, and you know, on the face of it, you know, people would say, well, why is he being chosen? I wanted to know why. What does he have in his DNA that makes him chosen? So that sort of case study, it's that's what I migrate towards, Dave. You know, I think we're in an elitist world. People migrate towards the most successful. No, I want to go towards the guys that have been successful in my eyes, you know. And you know, my partner in her own right is a very successful woman, and she's got a compelling story. So that's like, you know, if she was to do a podcast, I'd listen to that. But she doesn't operate at the highest level in terms of sport. I'd listen to her podcast, you know, and her story behind it.
Well, John, and I think you really, again, pick out an important point for me, that actually there are high profile people and there are less profile people, but we've all got a story that we can take something from it, you know. And, you know, you've given a couple of names there, but I think, you know, delving and being curious and interested, again, coming back to the theme of what you talked about in people and the person, we can take something from it if we're open to it. So, you know, thanks for sharing that little nugget and that thought. All it leaves me to say, John, is, you know, thanks very much again for sharing your story. I'm always drawn to the fact me and you could keep talking, and there's so much more that we haven't touched on, and you know, we've skimmed the surface. But maybe there'll be a future time where we can come back and delve a little bit deeper in some of those other areas. If people would be interested to be in contact with you or find out a little bit more about what you're doing, either in your coaching world or at the Grange, is there any way they can make contact with you? Is there social media or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, I'm on Twitter at John Blain 4. I'm also on LinkedIn, and my email address is johnblain4@hotmail.co.uk. Happily take that on, not a problem at all. But that's what I like to do. I like to help people. So, you know, don't feel as though they can't contact me, Dave. But look, before I go, I want to thank you, Dave. I mean, I'm not going to labour the point because you do get a little bit sort of embarrassed. I know that's not your style, but I think anyone that's listening today, if you're looking for someone to offer support, guidance, and just wisdom, and loyal, and I mean that, loyal tutorage, they can't look any further than you, because you've been colossal for the role you played in my life. So I appreciate it.
John, thanks ever so much. I appreciate that, and I want to thank you for that as well, because you know, I think it's important that we acknowledge those sort of relationships and what we offer, and it is part of my passion in what I do. So it's lovely to hear that it hasn't had an impact. So thank you for sharing that and being with me. Other than that, look after yourself. Good luck with the Grange. Keep on the journey. Keep learning. Get that CPD in, and you know, keep in touch with the Sports Stories brand and the podcast, and we'll be in touch and hopefully have you back on and we dig a bit deeper in the future. But John, thanks so much.
Thanks, Dave.
Cheers.
Take care. Cheers.
Well, there were elements of that conversation with John that I expected and elements I didn't. True to form, John was open, honest and reflective in his style. I really enjoyed hearing the connections that he has made throughout his career. The role of his family shone through for me. I also really valued hearing about his character elements that on reflection helped him as a player, whilst also got him into trouble at times. I was surprised, pleasantly surprised I may add, at how open John was about the difficult times he had as a player with Scotland and then as a coach at Yorkshire. His acceptance that these challenging times have made him the person he is today was fantastic to hear. And not only did he accept what went on, but has used and reflected on this to inform the style and approach he now brings to his current role as performance coach and director of cricket today. For me, John has really learnt and grown as a person through his career in and around sport and has maximised the opportunity sport has offered to him. Before sharing a couple of questions for you to ponder, I want to raise the concept John spoke to a great deal, that of self-learning or self-teaching. Is this a good or a bad thing? Does it prevent or hold us back as individuals from seeking and asking for help and support? I know it has hampered me in the past. So on to a couple of other questions for you to consider. What strategies do you have today that have helped you in the past but no longer help you now? How can you change these strategies? And the second question, linked to what I mentioned a bit earlier, as John says, you don't have to do it all on your own. So who do you call on when in need of some help and support? Who is in your trusted support network and what is missing from it? Over the next week or so, take some time to really consider these questions. For me, taking responsibility to act on your reflections from these questions, as well as those posed in previous episodes, are what it takes to move towards becoming the best versions of yourself more often with great skill. So take the first or next step now. Now, as a quick reminder, we are working on some great content for the Sports Stories Academy and working in collaboration with some amazing individuals who have incredible and memorable sports stories in their own right. Furthermore, the coaching and mentoring offer is coming together with a pool of vastly experienced coaches and mentors to help you overcome challenges as well as maximise opportunities. All the coaches and mentors that work with us at Sports Stories are aligned to our belief that sport is a hugely valuable mechanism, metaphor and example that can help individuals work towards being the best versions of themselves. So this leads me on to how you don't miss anything we are doing at Sports Stories and how you can maximise the value to you. Have a look at the website at www.sportstories247.com. You can subscribe to this as well as access all the podcasts, learning gems and courses there too. I would really appreciate it also if you would be kind enough to leave a review or a comment on Apple Podcasts or with your favourite podcast provider. As you know, this is really valuable in helping other listeners find the stories, the content we are sharing. Having a group of dedicated followers and listeners really helps us develop more for you. So please do what you can. So to those that have tuned in, shared or provided comments and feedback, thanks ever so much. It's great to know we are making a difference and offering great value to you. And lastly, a big thanks to John for being such a great guest today. And to finish off, I do hope you have a great week. I look forward to having you join me, Dave Levine, again next week for an incredible story. So till then, take care, look after yourself, and I'll see you soon.